Thanks so much, Liz. And we're delighted to welcome all of you to this webinar that's sponsored by the UNESCO Chair. And just to give you a bit of background about what that is, the chair was established in 2019. It's the UNESCO Chair on Food, Biodiversity and Sustainability Studies. And what we try to do with the chair is use it as a platform for change and discussing things about transformation. So the topic of power and resistance is very appropriate to the theme of the chair. And the idea is to use food systems as a lens to work towards biodiversity protection, enhancing community resilience in the face of climate change, increasing opportunities for marginalized groups, improving food security, and enhancing community well-being, including very broadly things around agroecology in particular. As we begin, I would like to acknowledge that where I work in Waterloo is located on the shared traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Neutral, and Haudenosaunee peoples. This land is part of the Dish with One Spoon Treaty between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, and it symbolizes the agreement to share, protect our resources, and not to engage in conflict. The principles, as I learned from an Oneida elder, are to only take what you need, leave enough for others, and clean the dish. These principles guide how I try to live my life and my work as a food scholar, and I hope can inform your work as well. So I'm going to hand it over right now to Liz to take care of some housekeeping details, and then we'll get back to the webinar.
Perfect. Thank you, Allison. Good morning, everyone. So just to let you all know, this webinar is being recorded so that we can share it afterwards with guests who weren't able to make it today, and then we will share it later on our YouTube channel publicly. So I will be turning everyone's microphones and cameras off so that we can just feature the speakers. If you have questions during the webinar, please direct them to the chat during the conversation, and we will have a designated question and answer period time after our speakers give their presentations. There is an option on Zoom to have auto-translated captions. If you would like to use that feature, you can select Show Captions and toggle the translation button, and that will allow you to select which caption language you would like to see. So the order of the event, Allison will give us a context of the topic for today, and then we will hear from our speakers, Erin Nelson, Andrew Spring, Joanna Wilkes, and then Eve Nimmo. And then after that, we will move into our audience question and answer period. And like I said, please use the chat to direct your questions into there. And I think that's all from me. So I'll pass it back over to you, Allison.
Thanks so much, Liz. So just to give you a bit of a background, in May, we hosted a webinar on power and resistance to celebrate the launch of the books by Molly Anderson called Transforming Food Systems, Narratives of Power, and the more recent book by Jennifer Clapp, Titans of Agriculture. And we had such a positive response and leveling of engagement that we decided to turn this into a theme for a series of webinars hosted by the chair. So today we have 4 stories of change that I'm delighted are going to be shared with you. They're really transformational and inspiring for me at least, and I hope they will be for you too. These are coming to us from the perspective of 4 of the regions, 4 of the 10 regions in the Food Learning and Growing Partnership, which we affectionately call FLOW. So we're excited to use this webinar as an opportunity and a jumping off point to introduce the FLOW partnership and to further unpack themes of power and resistance in the food system. So just to give you a really quick overview about FLOW, it's a 7-year short partnership. It's focused on understanding how transformation happens at the regional scale. It incorporates very, very intentionally and explicitly both academic and community partners who are working to understand more about transformation through the regional food systems, perspectives in Montreal, Ottawa, Vancouver Island, and the Northwest Territories in Canada, and then internationally in Brazil, Australia, India, Kenya, Mexico, and Sri Lanka. So I'm delighted to introduce our speakers who will share their experiences from their work in their communities as examples of power and resistance as part of their work that happens through the FLOW partnership. So we're going to begin with Erin Nelson. Erin is an associate professor at the University of Guelph in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology. She has a background in international development and rural studies. Her research explores the development of more sustainable food systems with a particular focus on agroecology initiatives in both Canada and Latin America. She's interested in how knowledge exchange can build capacity for agroecological production and how agroecology can contribute to ecological resilience and community well-being. The focus of what she's going to talk about today comes from work she's been doing in Mexico with partners in Veracruz, where she collaborates with farmer networks, researchers, and civil society organizations to scale up agroecological production of small-scale citrus farmers in ways that are healthy for their lands and the communities. Andrew Spring is an assistant professor in the Department of Geography and Environmental Studies at Wilfrid Laurier University. He's the Research Chair in Northern Sustainable Food Systems and director of the Laurier Center for Sustainable Food Systems. His research is driven by community priorities in the Northwest Territories to advance sustainable food systems and build capacity around climate change adaptation. For over 10 years, Andrew has supported participatory action research projects in collaboration with First Nations communities in the Northwest Territories. He's the principal investigator of the Future Harvest Partnership, which engages with food producers and local communities of the Northwest Territories to co-create research and generate insights for innovation and policy that it can inform the development of a climate resilient local food system. Next up, we have Joanna. Joanna Wilkes has recently completed her PhD in global governance at the Balsillie School of International Affairs. Joanna's research examines how international institutions address climate resilient farming and sustainable food futures, with a particular focus on agroecological transitions, Working with partners in Andhra Pradesh, as you're going to hear, India, Joanna has explored how zero budget natural farming, ZBNF, reduces farmer debt, builds on traditional knowledge, and fosters farmer to farmer learning. Her work highlights how enabling policy frameworks, influential advocates, community-led partnerships, and farmer to farmer learning networks have converged to make ZBNF one of the largest agroecological transitions in the world. And finally, we're delighted to also welcome Eve Nimmo. Eve is a historical archaeologist whose career spans Brazil, Ecuador, Canada, and the UK, working across museums, NGOs, and universities. Her research brings together public history, community-based research, oral histories, and material culture to explore cultural heritage in its many forms. In southern Brazil, Eve works with local communities to value and protect the agroecological and agroforestry systems to produce shade-grown erva mate in the Acaria forest of Parana. Sorry, I didn't say that exactly right, Eve. Apologies to you and your partners. By building networks grounded in traditional knowledge and practice, she supports the development of cultural and environmental heritage conservation programs, policies, and strategies that sustain both livelihoods and landscapes. And it's that focus that's the essence of her talk today. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Erin, and then you can follow suit from one speaker to the next, if that's okay with you. So welcome, and thank you so much for being here with us. We're really grateful to all of you for taking the time to prepare presentations and share your really inspirational knowledge with all of us. So over to you, Erin.
Thank you so much, Allison. Now I'm going to do the worst part of any webinar, which is when I try to share my screen. Okay, can someone let me know if it's up? Okay, thank you. Oh, and now I'm going to try to move the Zoom images so I can see my screen. Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Allison, for that introduction. It's really a pleasure to be here this morning. Sharing some stories from the work that I'm involved in Mexico. And the title of my presentation is Agrochemical Resistance in Mexico, the Power of the Agroecology Movement in Veracruz. I think these themes of power and resistance that are part of this, the framing of this webinar series fit really well with the stories I'm going to share from Mexico this morning, where sort of the power of the agroecological movement and the resistance they've been able to achieve to industrial agricultural practices are I find them inspiring, and I hope that you'll find them inspiring as well. I can't, there we go. So as Allison mentioned, this work is taking place under the umbrella of the FLOW partnership, and I'd just like to acknowledge that partnership and how important it's been to the work that's happening in Mexico. I also would like to acknowledge my co-presenters, who I think at least one of them should be on the call, although I didn't see her. It's very early in Mexico still, so I'm not sure if they've been able to sign on yet. But Laura Gomez Tovar and Manuel Angel Gomez Cruz are foundational to this work. They're central to the efforts that I'm going to be talking about this morning. They are both faculty at the University of Chapingo in Mexico. And importantly, they also have a family farm in the Veracruz region that's known as the Huerta Madre. It's an agroecological farm, a 16-hectare operation that is now certified organic and grows citrus products, among many, many other tropical fruits and other products. Laura will be speaking at a webinar in October to talk a little bit more about the Huerta Madre, so I'm going to try to resist the urge to go into too much detail about the exciting work that happens on their farm. To give you a sense of where this work is happening, this is a map of Mexico. You can see the orange highlighted region is the state of Veracruz, and in that piece that's pulled out, the northern part of Veracruz, which is shaded in dark green, is where the Huerta Madre farm is located, and it's also where the work is happening that I'm going to be talking about today. It is a citrus producing region. It is a region that is home to many, many primarily small scale farmers from a number of different indigenous groups. And the Huerta Madre is kind of at the center of what has become a really large network of agroecological producers. You can see from these photos some meetings of these agroecological farmers. The Huerta Madre is central in pulling this network together to engage in knowledge sharing, capacity building, and also collective action for political change. And that's what I'm going to be focusing on today. As I said, Laura will be talking about some of the knowledge sharing and capacity building work in about a month or so. And I'm going to focus on some of the efforts that this network has been part of with respect to collective action and political change. To set the stage for this, it's important to highlight a little bit about the national context in Mexico right now. And specifically to note that the federal government in Mexico since 2018 has really shown significant political support for agroecology. I've put up a couple of images from a conference that took place that was spearheaded by the federal government with participation from many different state governments and other actors from government as well as civil society. The title of the conference was Food Self-Sufficiency and Agroecology in a Multipolar World. And it took place in Oaxaca at the end of 2023, and it really signaled the strong support that the federal government in Mexico has shown for agroecology. And a kind of cornerstone of that political support for agroecology was the president of Mexico, Manuel Angel López Obrador, who was elected in 2018. 2 years into his presidential term, he decreed that Mexico as a country would ban glyphosate. And he gave that ban a 4-year window so that the country would have time to sort of get itself off of the dependency on glyphosate. Importantly, this ban on glyphosate was really closely linked to a ban on GMO corn. And I could go into a lot of detail about the cultural and dietary and economic and sort of all the different ways in which corn is really central to Mexican identity. But the ban on glyphosate and the ban on GM corn really are intricately linked. There was a lot of resistance to that ban, particularly from actors in the United States. In 2023, they postponed the ban until April, and then just days before it was meant to come into effect, they postponed the ban indefinitely. The resistance continues on the part of the agroecological movement. There is still a lot of effort underway to get the government to reinstate this ban on glyphosate. But regardless of what happens with the banning or the non-banning, it's really important to underline what the idea of this ban on glyphosate did in terms of sparking a lot of research and development and activity in the agroecology sector. So this is a screenshot of the website of Mexico's federal research agency, and they have an entire page dedicated to substituting glyphosate. So this is like, for those of us who are in Canada, it's the equivalent of the Tri-Council, SSHRC, and NSERC. And they've got this banner right across the page that says, yes, it is possible to produce food without glyphosate in Mexico. There are alternatives and scientific evidence. And the federal government, through this funding agency, has funded a number of really large-scale projects to develop alternatives so that farmers weren't just replacing glyphosate with another agrochemical, but that they were actually able to have a strong scientific foundation for replacing glyphosate with agroecological alternatives. This is from the same Science Council website. They've got this graph that they put out that shows reductions in glyphosate imports between 2020, when the ban was announced, and 2022. And that's that line in red that you can see a dramatic reduction. A caveat is that we don't actually know how much glyphosate really came into the country. And there were presumably also stores of glyphosate in the country that hadn't yet been applied. So we don't know how much glyphosate was being applied during this time, but certainly there's been a reduction as a result of the policy. And the other colored lines show yields of different key crops, including corn, sugarcane, citrus products are in yellow. And you can see the yields really don't change significantly, even as glyphosate imports dropped. And my last point on glyphosate is just an image, because I think we talk sometimes about different aspects of agroecology, but a picture speaks 1,000 words. And on the left, you can see an image from the Huerta Madre, where in place of glyphosate, they're using cover crops, as well as a whole range of other techniques. And you can just see, I mean, you can see the life there. The habitat for different animals. And on the other side, you can see orange plantation that's been sprayed with glyphosate, and just everything is dead. And the impact this has on the soil as well as the agroecosystem is, I think, laid bare really nicely in this contrasting set of pictures. So I'm going to turn my attention really quickly to another campaign against a different agrochemical, Benevia, cyantraniliprole, which is used heavily was used heavily in Veracruz and Puebla to combat greening disease in citrus plantations, but was also killing off bee populations. And this agroecological network came together and was joined by beekeeper associations, other municipalities, state actors, NGOs, civil society, universities, research centers, industry. A whole variety of actors came together and created a really strong letter writing and political advocacy campaign to try to get these state governments to stop the widespread spraying of this insecticide. And it's a great example of success. So they were able to get the governments of Puebla and Veracruz in 2023 and 2024 to suspend this widespread application of Benevia. And they were also importantly able to get themselves at the table as part of a national consultative council for plant protection. So this coalition now has a seat at the table to try to decide what products can and should be applied. I think I'm at the end of my time, so I'm going to wrap it up quickly and just show one last image of some of the people who are central to this work, and also the landscape that is so important and really is at the heart of the efforts to stop the use of these agrochemicals. It's really about protecting these people and protecting these landscapes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Erin, for that incredibly inspiring set of stories. Those are really great, great stories of change to know about. So you're getting lots of applause and hearts. And thanks for keeping the time. Andrew, we're going to turn it over to you now.
There we go. Just had to find the volume. And then I've got to turn this into presentation mode. It's my turn to bubble around with that. You see notes or screen?
We see notes.
Oh man, how do I change this? There we go. Better?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Again, my name is Andrew. I'm gonna look off before I start. I'm going to take you down from, I guess, up from the nice warm temperatures of Mexico up into maybe a little bit of a colder place in the Northwest Territories of what we know as Canada. For those of you who've seen me present before, I do talk a lot about building sustainable food systems in the Northwest Territories. But for today, a little bit of a different spin. So, yeah, a lot of my stories start in a little town called Kakisa in Northwest Territories, and this is home of the Kagitu First Nations. You can see the entire community there. It's a community of maybe 40, maybe 50 people, depending on how busy the weekend is. But it's a small community in the boreal forest that really kind of relies on traditional food systems and the traditional economy to support livelihoods. It's so small, it lacks a grocery store. So if you are wanting to go to the groceries, it's a 300-kilometer round trip to the nearest store. So it's a somewhat isolated community in terms of kind of isolated communities in the north. It's actually very accessible. But in terms of food systems, there are some things that are kind of very lacking. And just for a bit of context, you can get to the capital of Yellowknife. It's about a 4-hour drive. But during times of highway closures due to forest fires, that is where kind of groceries are purchased. And if you want to visit Eve down at Edmonton, it's a 16-hour drive, which is always happens. And that's Edmonton is also a kind of a hub of the Northwest Territories. But to understand the food systems, you really have to kind of understand the traditional food system here. So this is what the community really relies on and has relied on for thousands of years. That's the harvesting of what they call country foods or traditional foods that kind of meet the nutritional requirements and form the basis of the traditional economy in the community. So this is fish is the big staple, as you can see from the kind of community barbecue there. Berries, but moose. Caribou, geese, ducks, all these things that uh, are part of like the community's kind of cultural and spiritual link to the land. Okay, so it's all about the connection to the land, connection to each other, as a small kind of tight-knit community. And that's really how the food system functions. And some of the really wonderful parts of it is this idea of food sharing, where food is harvested from the land, brought back to the community, and just shared amongst pretty much everyone in the community. So at the heart of the food system is really this approach that food should be shared and given to everybody who needs it. And so that's a really wonderful kind of aspect of the traditional food system. But as we know, the North is suffering from the direct impacts of climate change. And what we need to understand is that global climate change is happening about 4 to 5 times the global average, which is resulting in really fundamental changes to the ecosystem. This picture is of the forest fire that occurred, right up to the borders of Kakisa in 2014. But the community has been revisited by forest fires in 2013 and lives now in summer full of smoke and always the potential threat of kind of forest fires in many of the surrounding communities as well. And so you can imagine this is really having an impact on how the community is accessing the land and the availability of traditional foods. So climate change is really limiting communities' ability to get traditional foods and kind of, maintain their food system. So we started to work with Kagitu First Nation around 12 years ago on a climate change adaptation program. And again, here's some of the wonderful kind of events that we've done with the community over time. And really, we asked the question of how is climate change affecting you and what do you want to do about it? And so this really kind of put the community's vision of food sovereignty into the forefront. One of the things that the community mentioned is like, well, food is expensive. We don't have access to fresh, affordable food. Our grocery store is really far away. how can we learn how to grow food? And so really over the past 12 years, we've done a lot of work to figure out how to grow food and understand that growing food in the north is not something that happens as part of the traditional food system. If anything, it was introduced by kind of residential schools and other activities that really have a negative impact on Indigenous nations. So a lot of the work we're trying to do in Kakisa is figure out how agriculture or growing food fits into their traditional food system. And you can see over time, we've gone from small garden boxes by the river due to many wonderful grad students and wonderful people in the community, expanded it to what you can see now in 2024, where we have fairly large infrastructure and we're actually able to grow a lot of food. So it's really interesting how, we've taken this from this idea of like, okay, well, let's figure out how to do it to actually growing a lot of food. Um, and yeah, I think this is a lot of power and resistance, but kind of small building along the way. And I think to understand the actual impacts of that, you actually have to go a little bit of history to understand like what this means and how significant this actually is. So you do have to go into a little bit of a history lesson of how Canada was settled. And really it was settled, expanded westward and northwards due to the number of treaties. So Kakisa fits with under Treaty 11, which essentially, along with many of the numbered treaties, were a treaty signed with the Crown to really kind of give up jurisdiction and or authority over the land to the Crown. And so, as a Treaty 11 community, they actually have very little say on their traditional territories. So, in the context of modern treaties, which are happening, you know them as comprehensive land claims, they're happening in the Northwest Territories, but again, not in the Decho region where Kakisa is found. So there still are very limited co-management over resources and very limited capacity through regional organizations. So those are tools that come with modern treaties, but because Kakisa doesn't have that, they don't have access to a lot of those capacities and resources. And I say limited here because, like in practice, a lot of good work is being done to engage the community. But on paper, they're actually very limited in the decision-making authority they have over their lands. And so, really, where this all goes is that the community is tying the control over their traditional territories and essentially land sovereignty to the heart of their food sovereignty movement. So, through the numbered treaties, they gave up a lot of their authority and sovereignty over the lands, and they see all this food system work as building these blocks towards their ultimate goal is having more protection and say over their traditional territories. So if your food comes from the land, having some say over how your land is, what happens on your land is fundamental, right? So to me, it's food sovereignty and land sovereignty are very interchangeable here. So, in the lack of all these tools to actually have this authority over their land, they're really kind of showing their sovereignty through stewardship. Okay, so they're actively doing the things that assert their kind of traditional authority and their traditional governance over the land. So they're doing lots of things to kind of actively take care of the land. They're maintaining trails, they're maintaining, cabins and traditional harvesting areas. They're mapping and monitoring changes to the land. They're implementing kind of guardians programs to kind of formally have that recognition of stewards in the lands, and guardian programs are wonderful tools of kind of Indigenous-led conservation, which is a whole other thing that we can get into. They are promoting their language and culture and through kind of youth programs as well. And they're continuing to harvest traditional foods. So all of these are kind of these acts of kind of reclaiming a lot of the traditional authority and sovereignty over their landscape and therefore their food system. And so we kind of, as their support team and collaborators, have kind of said, well, this for us, this resonates in terms of agroecology and the language of agroecology being used. And so we're taking this aspect of stewardship over the land and applying it to what we're doing in the gardens. So we're saying that a lot of these, a lot of these things that the community wants to do in terms of, grow food, be more sovereign on the land, really kind of fits with the language that that agroecology brings us. And so when we're thinking about agriculture in this space, why would agriculture develop anyway within these communities, if not by like, except for the fact that they're doing agroecology, right? So it really gives us a shining star in which to kind of guide our food production. So we're meeting kind of the vision of the community. And so here's a model of agroecology that we've been thinking about in the North for quite some time now. And so what agroecology does now is lets us use different language to think about our food system, both at the community level and the regional level. And so this is work done by a recent graduate student, Jen Temmer, where we're thinking about, from fisheries to gardens to groceries to guardians. So all aspects of the food system really have to be grounded in this community values, language, and culture as part of the food system. And so we're using this kind of language of agroecology now to assert, I guess, this kind of community leadership and governance over food systems. And it becomes the relationships and connections to surrounding communities, their shared values, their shared languages, and their sharing of knowledges and experiences that are really key to taking, I guess, to scaling up and out of communities like Kikisa to communities like Sambake and surrounding communities. So in a region where there really is a lack of former governance structures, there's this ground up vision of self-sufficiency and self-reliance that is emerging through the work that Kagitu First Nations is doing. And that is me. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew, for that amazing presentation and for framing the work that's happening in terms of power and resistance. It's a really fascinating look at your work from a slightly different perspective, and I really appreciate what you shared with us. It's also really inspiring. Joanna, over to you. If you would like to get started, that would be great. I'm going to remind people that when we're at the end of our 4 presentations, you're very welcome to put questions in the chat. I think, Liz, that's what we're asking people to do. Is that correct? Okay, Liz is otherwise occupied. Andrew, thank you. Amazing. Team. Joanna, are you all
Yes,
good to go?
I might have to ask Liz. Liz, if you're there, if you could share my slides for me because the application isn't letting me do it.
No problem. I will pull
Thank
them
you,
up.
Liz.
And thanks for the chat message, Liz.
Yeah.
Multitasking as always.
Okay, so I'm going to.
Thank you, Liz.
How's that look?
That's perfect. Thank you so much, Liz, for lots of help this morning. So I just want to say thank you so much for having me as part of the panel. I am so grateful, and it's such a privilege to be able to hear all the wonderful work that's happening across the flow regions and to be part of such an incredible process. I also want to highlight that the work I'm discussing here today is the culmination of efforts and successes by women's self-help groups, community natural farmers, our YSS staff, Vijay Kumarsar, who has been a unflagging champion of this work in Andhra Pradesh and globally, and many others. So I'm privileged enough to learn from them and share this policy story, which is really special and transformational in a way that illustrates pathways towards a better future. And in particular, thinking about what the role of the state could be as an enabling agent for change. So I'll just go, Liz, if you can go to the next slide, thanks. So our YSS, which is Rutha Sankara Samantha, which is translated in English to Farmers Empowerment Organization, has been a driving force in the transition towards natural farming in Andhra Pradesh for quite a while now. Our YSS is a state partner non-for-profit who supports training of farmers in natural farming methods across the state. So one of the really unique things is that RYSS took a different approach to agroecological transitions in several ways than some of the other stories that we hear and see, which is one, they actually came at this from a poverty lens versus a food systems lens originally. Vijay Kumarsar was very involved with the women's self-help groups and different approaches to poverty reduction in the state of Andhra Pradesh, and brought that lens when moving over into food systems work versus starting from the origin of a food systems lens. It's also embedded within the state structure as kind of an arm's length non-for-profit, and it depends on a dense ground network of women's self-help groups across the state that were established long ago. So RYSS is not the start of this movement. Rather, it's the formalization of a relationship of trust, local knowledge, and innovative ways for government to support the expansion of this work, as it is separate but connected to the state government. So in 2022, RYSS further developed the long-term impact for launching the first of its kind farmer training program, which is really amazing. So what this farmer training program does is it offers the farmers a path to becoming farmer scientists, which is building on the idea of champion farmers, and contributing to the expansion of community natural farming and being accredited in the process. And I'll actually talk about the academy in a few minutes. The GIST report, which was also a very central pivot point, was released in 2023. And what this did is it was a very deep, wide study of work to look at the CNF impact on creating healthier planets, communities, and individuals while keeping economies and livelihoods central to the discussion. RYSS and Vijay Kumarsar, for his work as a champion, both domestically and internationally, have been awarded several awards, including the Prize for Humanity in 2024. And Andhra Pradesh has become one of the largest agroecological transitions in the world. So they're expecting and planning to reach 6 million farmers in Andhra alone, and expanding their reach across borders to help create kind of co-learning and co-sharing. For example, it's overlapping with this webinar, but there's a webinar that RYSS is hosting along with Zambia around the co-sharing work they're doing with both the Ministry of Agriculture there at the national level and communities. So their work has motivated governments and stakeholders from over 50 nations to engage with Andhra to learn from what they're doing, which is really wonderful. And after all the presenters are done, I'll put a list of links into the chat for all the different places that you can see some of what RYSS is doing. So Liz, if we can go to the next slide. So one of the really interesting things is not only are we looking at long-term transformational outcomes in stable states, but we're also thinking about what this means in terms of disaster. So one of the things that RYSS has been really conscious of and thoughtful of is they are in a cyclone-prone area of southern India. And so thinking about what natural farming looks like side by side with more conventional commercial input farming, research has shown that CNF, or community natural farming, uses less water, increases income potential, and enhances biodiversity in long-term shifts. But the methods that are deployed also prove to be more resilient during extreme weather events. During the 2024 cyclone, or the 2023 cyclone, community natural farms are actually showing to have stronger rice stands that can withstand the flooding and winds better than their counterparts. And so all in the links also share a YouTube video that was produced by RYSS to show the flyover of the post-cyclonic period of cross comparisons, which actually pairs really nicely, Aaron, with the picture that you showed, because it's a direct neighbor to neighbor correlation. So the soil conditions are similar. A lot of the factors that we would see in fields that maybe are disparate from one another, you don't have to look at that because it's actually two farms that are sitting directly side by side. Next slide, please. Thanks, Liz. So I'm going to go over some different ways in which we're seeing resistance and transformation happening in Andhra. So one of the unique things that I mentioned earlier was that Andhra has taken a very unique stand that it is part of being a central enabler, that the state is an agent of change. So the state recognized the power of natural farming and has been very supportive of this transition, including creating and establishing networks through RYSS that act as extension offices in communities around Andhra Pradesh. Interestingly, the national government has also recognized the significant success that's happening in Andhra and recently announced an attempt to roll out supports across the country that would create the enabling conditions to support community natural farming to happen in other areas. Next, Liz. Thank you. So there's a couple of ways, so in particular, 9 tenets that RYSS discuss, and I took them directly from the website because that's how I know I will absolutely not get them wrong. So it lies on 9 principal actions, which is keep soil covered with crops year round, plant diverse crops and trees, so 15 to 20 crops, minimize disturbance to the soil so it becomes a living root. And this is where actually the interesting thing about the cyclones happen, because when you're pulling up rice stands, what you're seeing is that the bulb of that rice stand is actually significantly denser and significantly heavier than you're going to see at the farm next door. The next thing is use biostimulants as natural catalysts. So that's the photo you see here. During my visit to Andhra, the farmers were kind enough to do a demonstration to show me how the natural stimulants are made, but also to train other farmers in the area that are in the transition period or interested in the transition period. So I got to learn alongside those farmers on how these biostimulants were being made and how they are being kept and processed. The next one is to integrate animals into farming. The 6th is increase organic residual on soil and keep crops covered. The 7th is use indigenous seed. The 8th is manage pests biologically or botanically, sorry. And the 9th is eliminate synthetic fertilizers, herbicides, and pesticides. So these are the 9 tenets that farmers follow as they start this transition over to community natural farming. There's also really large social benefits and social structures that are upholding this transformation, such as co-learning and community-led transitions. So this is farmers learning from each other. There is networks of what we call champion farmers, and these are the farmers who help train, onboard, and support other farmers in their region while they're making the transition. It's really supported in the building of networks of support. So this is enhancing and emboldening the role of women's groups and local RYSS staff to serve as points of contact and connection to farmers, and also to enhance outcomes. So what we're seeing is increases in diet diversity, diversified income streams, and creating connections. And I just want to pause here because the really interesting thing is that this is also creating risk mitigation within community that's community bound and community relevant. So this is like transferring your plot of land over at one portion at a time. So starting at 25%, going to 50 and then to 100, introducing things like anytime money markets, which I will talk about in the next slide. Next slide, Liz. Thanks. So the anytime money model helps reduce financial risks and enhance diet diversity. So what this is it's you might grow rice, or you might grow mangoes, or you might grow a staple commodity crop that's mixed in with those 15 to 20 other kinds of seed varieties and things that are growing. But what you also have is anytime money market, which you can harvest for your own consumption as well as selling on roadside stands to produce a year-round income supplement. So in addition to self-determined transition plans, such as converting percentages of the farm over time, this helps manage financial risk. Next slide. So finally, agency and education. This is a really unique thing that I mentioned earlier that's happening in Andhra, which is the Indo-German Global Academy. And the Academy focuses on the empowering of farmers to recognize for the experts they are contributing to research, data collection, training, the trainer style programs. So what you see here is farmers engaging in research development, learning and education, training and capacity building, and upscaling. And so this allows farmers not only to get a certificate from a program, but also to truly actually engage with other farmers in the data collection and consistency of the relevance of the information. For example, several of the farmer scientists are in Zambia working with Zambian farmers to support the transition towards natural farming. But this also helps with combating some of the narratives and limited data and lack of evidence that we hear when we're talking about agroecology. So there's a lot of discussion around like there isn't enough evidence, there isn't enough data. But what these farmer scientists are doing is they're collecting substantively this data to refute and resist against that narrative. Next slide. So finally, what's next? So connecting to flow and what's next. One of the things is Andhra Pradesh is a very well-studied region. There's a lot of science and research coming out of the collaborations that RYSS have established. But one of the things I'm really interested in is telling this policy transformation story through the community natural farm transitions. As something that is an underlying enabler for all the other shifts that we're seeing. So how can we see policy in the state as being a space of enabling power and not just restraint power? And Erin, I really liked how you talked about in your discussion these two different examples, and one where there was a state level government who really engaged in that process. And so it's really interesting to see this flow from the state to the national level to see how successful that's going to be, because you kind of lose a little bit of that context and groundswell network as you start to scale up. But I really like that the work with community natural farming also talks about scaling out and keeping those connections deep. So thank you so much. I just want to reiterate that I'm so grateful for RYSS offering me the privilege and opportunity to sit with them, learn from them, and tell these stories. And I continue to look forward to doing that work. So thank you to Vijay Kumar sir, the local and regional offices, Soumya, Nagi Reddy, Swati, and so many of the farmers and regional staff who took their days and weeks to help me learn this process.
Joanna, thank you for that really, truly inspirational story and sharing the research and the knowledge sharing and knowledge co-creation and the way that this is making its way into the bigger world, and really, really providing examples of agroecology and transition that farmers can be inspired about and know work. I think that's a really important message from the work that RYSS is doing. So thank you so much. And we're going to turn our attention now to Eve, who is going to talk to us about GIAs. Over to you, Eve. Are you all set to go, or do you need some technical assistance?
Liz is going to help me out with the technical bits. So thank you for that, Liz. So good morning, everyone. Thank you again for inviting me to participate in this webinar. It's really exciting to be part of this panel with my wonderful colleagues. And I think obviously the audience will see the very many links that connect all of these very different regions. And I think that that's one of the really amazing things about the Flow Network is that although we work in very, very different contexts, communities, there are these connections that bring us all together around this idea of transformational change in terms of food systems. And so today I'm going to talk a little bit about the work that I have been doing over the last 10 years with farmers in southern Brazil who have a traditional agroforestry production system that produces erva mate. And so next slide, please, Liz. So in May of this year, we finally received the designation from the FAO as a globally important agricultural heritage system. And this is a project that I led for the last 5 years. We started kind of mid-2020, the process of putting together this candidacy. And finally, in May of this year, we were awarded the GIAs. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that process today and how it has, sorry, I have allergies and Edmonton right now is very allergic to me, or I'm very allergic to Edmonton. So how this process has really showcased kind of the resilience and resistance to conventional market pressures, conventional market agriculture in the region. And so just to give you a background, the globally important agricultural heritage system from the FAO is a program that recognizes agroecosystems that have a really unique connection between the ecosystem itself, the landscape, with culture, heritage, social organization, agrobiodiversity, food security. And so they recognize these situated agricultural systems that have been really, really important to maintain agrobiodiversity in the region, as well as landscapes, but also culture and heritage belonging to the place and traditional knowledge. And so we learned about this program in 2020 and decided that based on the work that we had been doing with the communities in Brazil for many years, that they would be an excellent addition to this network. And so currently, today, there are 92 sites that are recognized by the FAO around the world. And in Brazil, we are the second that has been recognized. So it's a huge accomplishment for these farmers to gain this kind of international recognition. Next slide, please, Liz. So what is shade-grown yerba mate? It is a traditional yerba mate. First of all, for those of you who don't know, is yerba mate in Spanish, and it's a tea or infusion that's consumed by many people throughout southern South America. It's consumed. You can see the first picture here on the left. It's consumed traditionally in a gourd. The leaves are ground up, and hot water is poured into the gourd and consumed through a metal straw. In the hotter countries of southern South America, like in Uruguay and Paraguay, it's also consumed cold. So this is it's a tradition that comes from the Guarani indigenous people who learned to cultivate and process the yerba mate tree. It is a tree for over many generations, and with the settlers and colonization that came into southern Brazil starting in the 1600s, that practice was kind of appropriated by the settler communities and has become a very widespread cultural symbol of friendship and hospitality. And so how it's produced, because yerba mate, the tree, is native to the Araucaria forest, the production of yerba mate from a traditional perspective happens within the forest. So it's a natural agroforestry system. And the shade of the forest provides kind of the right conditions for the plant to thrive. It offers the tea a very unique flavor that's much more smooth and less astringent, less bitter than yerba mate that is produced in full sun monoculture kind of conditions. And so the forest environment is actually really important. Not just the shade, but the interactions with the forest is really important for the production of yerba mate. And I think it's important to recognize that it's because it occurs within the forest and because this traditional agroforestry system has been maintained for generations, there is still forest in this part of Brazil, right? There's so much deforestation that has happened throughout the state, especially, well, I'm sure you are all aware, the Atlantic forest, I think there's only 1% of the actual old growth forest left. And in the state of Paraná, 20 to 25% is covered with secondary forest of what used to be covered by forest. And a lot of that is linked to traditional agroforestry production systems like yerba mate. So it's important for the maintenance of the forest as a biodiversity hotspot. It's also an important cultural symbol, and there's a lot of traditional knowledge and understanding of the forest and cultural practice that is associated with it. Next slide, please, Liz. So agroforestry systems like this one in southern Brazil occur on small scale properties. They occur in traditional communities and in indigenous communities. And so it's a very multiple land use way of using properties. And so it's not just yerba mate that is produced within the forest and the agroforestry system. Most properties and communities also have farms that are agroecological and gardens to produce kind of vegetables, as well as livestock production. And so, and other native species that are produced and cultivated on the farm. So they're very, very biodiverse, very agrobiodiverse, and they maintain this kind of multi-use landscape. Next slide, please, Liz. So just to give you a sense of the region that we're working with, which is actually a very, very large region. We're working across 11 municipalities and 2 indigenous communities that are Guarani and Caingangue. There are currently 400 farmers who are kind of registered to be part of this project or this program, the GIA's program. It's not all farmers who produce yerba mate who are included in this, because it's very specifically for those who have maintained these kinds of traditional practices in the traditional agroforestry system. But as you can see, it's a huge, part of the landscape within southern Paraná. Okay. Next slide, please, Liz. So as part of the GIA's program, one of the things that we had to do was put together a dynamic conservation action plan. And this action plan had to be based on an understanding of the challenges and threats to the system. And so I just wanted to highlight a few of those for you here today, because I think it sets the stage a bit to talk about the resilience and the resistance that occurs within these systems. So through the many years of research and engagement with these communities that myself and my partners have been doing over the last 10 to 15 years, is we've realized that there's, and I should mention that the development of this proposal, this candidacy, happened absolutely from the ground up. So as the coordinator of the project, I worked with all of the partners that are part of this program, which there's over 30 partners, including farmer unions and organizations, as well as state, local, state and federal institutions of research. And so it's a really big network of people working to support these systems. So the challenges and threats that we really understand as being the main issues for this system is, first of all, the invisibility of family farming and the silencing of traditional Indigenous communities in the region, as well as the lack of recognition of differentiated products and appreciation of traditional knowledge. And this is something that within the market is a really, really big concern, because farmers they sell their product basically as green leaves. And they have very little autonomy over who they sell it to. They have no negotiation power within these arrangements with big industry, and there isn't a lot of monetary recognition or value given to traditional systems. It's basically given the same price as yerba mate that's produced, not in a traditional system or in a monoculture full sun condition. There's also a lot of pressure to expand the agro-industrial complex and pressure to implement monocultures and move toward this kind of high productivity, high input, high yield model of doing agriculture for yerba mate production. And so our dynamic conservation action plan has three axes of action that include awareness, communication, and dissemination, not only within communities themselves, but to the wider community, the region, consumers as well, because there's very little recognition of this, that this system exists and that it's has a better quality product. As well as focusing cooperativism and solidarity economy. And so thinking about bringing people together to develop a collaborative branding, supporting unions, supporting local organizations, and participatory certification and sustainable development in lifeways. And so really supporting kind of the farmers to maintain their lifeways in a just and economically viable way. Next slide, please, Liz. And so just to give you a sense of one of the biggest...
Eve, we're at time.
Oh my goodness.
Sorry, I don't know where you are in your presentation, but just to let you know that if you could wrap it up in a couple of minutes, that would be super. Thank you. Sorry. No, that's okay. It's fascinating. I hate to interrupt you.
Okay, so Liz, let's skip this slide and we'll go to just two things I wanted to talk about very, very briefly, and I apologize for going over. So within these systems, what we have noticed, one of the foundational elements of building this candidacy was narratives, right? And so one of the things that we found is that narratives shared among communities, shared with us, really demonstrate the resistance and the resilience of these systems. And so I'll just give you a couple of very brief examples. Going back to the glyphosate discussion that Aaron and also Joanna pointed to, is that farmers are actively resisting this kind of imposition because they see themselves as being observers and understand the people who understand the ecosystem. And so Paulo says that they resist this kind of technical insistence. He doesn't say technical assistance, he calls it technical insistence, which I think is really a kind of an interesting play on words that he uses to show kind of the resistance that occurs within these systems. And also, sorry, next slide, Liz, there's narratives of resilience that people really see themselves as being part of maintaining this system, and then having the identity and the joy that comes from being part of this forested system that is resilient, that can bounce back, that they see it with their own eyes. So finally, just the last slide, Liz, thank you. So the GIA's designation, what we hope will support this resilience by enabling the agroforestry system to expand, to provide greater recognition of the cultural and ecological value of this yerba mate, and also supporting kind of the recognition of the system through stewardship and sustainable use of forests, and creating alternative markets for the products that come from these systems. And so final slide. Thank you. Sorry, I apologize for going over. So excited. I get too excited.
Well, it's a very exciting story, and thank you so much for sharing it with us. And thank you for bringing us, looping over to, really inspiring, Eve, looping us into the realm of culture and cultural dynamics, and how that is so central to a lot of the work that's going on in the ground. So speaks to the idea of the movement, the agroecological movement and transitions, as much as the production side, which is key, obviously, but how it's all intertwined. So thank you so much for that. To all of our amazing panelists. And while we wait for our great audience to come up with some questions for you, one thing that I would like to explore is this idea of how the work that you're doing has to do with, and it's all action-oriented work, which is really amazing. So you're all to be congratulated for doing such embedded work. But what I'm curious about is, how does this connect to broader movements, or do you see it connecting to broader movements of food sovereignty and self-determination? So I don't know if, do we want to go in the same order as the speakers, perhaps? Start with Aaron and then go to Andrew, Joanna, and Eve for that question while we wait for people to put some questions in the chat. Does that sound okay?
Sure. Thanks, Allison. I mean, the short answer to your question, I think, would be yes, it connects to broader movements. I think this idea of self-determination and sovereignty was something that I heard across all of the different presentations. And I don't think I mentioned it explicitly, but when we talk about, like, can the Mexican government decide what they want to do about glyphosate or GM corn? And we've seen recently, with the recent decision of a trade panel from the US, Canada, Mexico Free Trade Agreement, that they've actually been told they can't. So you have all of these forces, I think, acting against the kind of work we're trying to do. And I think that makes it all the more important to be coming together to share our stories. And I know earlier this summer, Eve and someone she works with from Brazil was able to come down and see the work happening in Mexico. And I think because we're kind of resisting really powerful forces, it's all the more important that we come together. Because I think as a network, we can inspire each other, we can keep each other motivated in the face of some of these setbacks. And I think, as the example of Benevia shows, when, like, a whole bunch of actors come together, you also have a much greater chance of success. So I think this idea of networking, sharing stories, keeping each other motivated in the face of challenge and resistance from this industrial kind of neoliberal system is all really important. And I think this webinar is part of that. So it's really, I think I'm going to leave today feeling more inspired and more connected to this greater movement.
Yeah, just to jump on some of what Aaron was saying, we were doing this work in the Northwest Territories, and we knew it was something like agroecology, but was different. And it was actually a trip down to Brazil to visit Eve with Allison and Aaron, that Chief Lloyd Chico from Cogitu First Nation and I were walking around one of the kind of community forest plots, and we just kind of looked at each other and we said, you know what, we could be in the Northwest Territories right now. Like this is exactly the same feeling. And so for us, it's this like support and solidarity that we're building. You know, like again, this presentation is from four corners of the earth, pretty much. But we can all see that there's so many similarities. We just talk a little bit differently in terms of context or the food, but really kind of the underlying issues are relatively similar. And so it's the network building that becomes really important to move forward.
Yeah, I think that's an important message is that in the face of shared challenges, each community comes up with its own specific context-based solutions, but the solidarity helps to build the movement and make all of us stronger and able to learn from each other. So that's a great point. Sorry, Joanna, over to you.
Oh, that's actually a really great jumping off point, Allison. So thanks, because one of the things I was going to mention actually about the Andhra case and how it fits in with the other communities is, so really interestingly, my sense that I get is that Andhra and what's happening in Andhra is very deeply connected to global and national discussions. So like Vijay Kumar sir was engaged with the UN Food Systems Summit in some capacities. But then also the HLP 20 report that was just launched really features Andhra Pradesh also as a case study in terms of resilience and building resilient food systems. And so I think what we're seeing is that I'm not sure if they would see themselves connected to any particular movement, but I think what they see is this kind of collaboration and this solidarity with other communities, right? So this idea of understanding and seeing a community where they're at and wanting to support them in their journey towards enabling community natural farming, and the very practical elements of that. I also see that while they're shifting to scale out instead of scale up, there's also always a compromise. Those aren't binaries, but I think this idea of like scaling out to support partners, but also growing depth at home has been really a big angle. So things like the academy that are allowing these farmer scientists, so champion farmers who become farmer scientists, who then get an accreditation and a certificate that is a formalized degree that allows them to be seen as equal to their scientific counterparts and part of that scientific process. Creates a policy stickiness that helps us ensure that that stays around, and then that data collection and that policy enabling environment really is a central part of decision making in Andhra moving forward. So yeah, I see it connected, but more so to this solidarity of helping other communities really find themselves and enable that process to occur.
Yeah, I agree, Joanna. And I think that that's one of the things that we have noticed with the work that we're doing in Brazil is that there's lots of discussion, particularly at the national level in Brazil, about many kinds of, the sustainable development goals in connection to, for example, right now with the COP30, what's going on. So there's lots of ideas it's what's happening at the national level about how things should be, and it doesn't necessarily connect with what actually happens on the ground. And so I think what these kind of these grassroots movements or these bottom-up movements like the GIAs, which was developed completely without any support from the national government per se, except for obviously the input from the research institutions, but it was people within the institutions, not the institutions themselves, that now I've lost my train of thought. I apologize. It's early in the morning for me. That's my excuse. So there is this kind of disconnect between what is happening on the ground and what is at the national level that the governments think should be happening, right? And so I think these are all really good examples of how policy can have that connection to wider discussions, but it has to be seen. It has to, like, these local resilient and resistant systems or these movements have to be seen by those larger discussions about policy, about kind of the international goals or frameworks that we're working with. And how to do that is something that I think the GIA's program allowed us to do that. So we're in conversation with now with kind of national and state level policymakers, but for a long time it was very much hidden. So
thanks for that, Eve. And there's actually a question from the audience for you, and then there's one for Joanna. So maybe we'll get to your question first, and then I have some more follow-up questions for everybody. Eve, when we no longer see sustainable Indigenous ag systems, it seems harder to value them. I'm thinking that the closer we are to the traditional ways of living, the more we can learn about Indigenous knowledge. Great work, Eve. I'm wondering, what role does exposure to a money-driven economic system have on traditional farming practices?
That's a great question, Doug. And I think that it's a complicated question as well, because we work with a few Indigenous communities, but also traditional communities and small-scale family farmers. And so we see the engagement kind of with the market differently in these communities and how they interact with them. And I think because the cultural and the traditional knowledge associated with these systems is really quite deep within these communities, there has been this much resistance. So I think it shows that because they still exist, that is like an active form of resistance. And because they recognize the value of these systems, it's kind of it's enabling them to continue. And so like I said, there has been a lot of pressure to move to more high productivity, high yield kind of production for yerba mate. But because there is so much, there's so much tied to the cultural and historical significance of these systems, the resistance comes from not wanting to give that up. And so I think that they're feeling the pressure, but I think most communities are, because they recognize that there is so much value in continuing to do this kind of traditional practice, that they have resisted that, actively resisted that, knowing that they're offering a better product, that they're doing something for the region, that it goes much further beyond just kind of producing a product. They're producing ecosystem services. They're producing, a range of socio-environmental services. And so I think that it is a complicated question, and it has impacted the way in some ways the traditional things are yerba mate is produced, but the resistance and the resilience is still kind of maintaining those traditional practices. But they are changing in some ways. Through innovation from the farmers themselves, which I think is part of the dynamic conservation of the system.
Can I jump in and add a quick point on that note?
Please go ahead. Yeah.
One of the things that I think we found in common when Eve was visiting Mexico was that farmers in Brazil and also in Mexico are recognizing these market pressures, but also trying to figure out ways that they can gain a little bit of agency within the market system. And so there's efforts happening that are kind of running parallel in both locations to say, how can we find spaces to differentiate what we're doing on the market? So I won't go into too much detail about that. I think it could be another webinar, but I think finding ways to actually have this type of production recognized in the market economy that, for better or for worse, most of these farmers are living and functioning in, is really important.
Yeah, and it raises questions about the solidarity economy and points to the narratives that you were talking about, Eve, when you were giving your presentation. Adrian Johnson added existence as resistance in the chat, so very powerful. Thanks for that. And Doug, thank you so much for your question. That was great. Zheng Zhang has put a question in the chat for Joanna. Thanks for the very interesting presentation. Could you elaborate on how the Farmer Scientist Initiative benefits the farmers in return? How do the research findings enhance farmers' livelihoods? There's a lot of questions, Zheng Zhang. And do farmers have a say in determining the research topics and methods, not just assisting with data collection? Thanks. So over to you, Joanna.
Thanks. And thanks, Zheng Zhang. That's a great question. It's relatively new. So I believe it was launched, if I'm not mistaken, in 2022. And I was in Andhra in 2024. So one of our initial discussions that I had when I got to Andhra was kind of the discussion started and we started talking about the academy. And the more I thought about it, the more interested I became in it. Because what I find really interesting about the academy is it's tangible and intangible. And I think the partnership of those two benefits are really important. So the intangible is the empowerment process that people go through when they go through the academy of moving from being a farmer to a champion farmer to a farmer scientist. It really gives a lot of agency and empowerment within that farmer's hands of being part of the movement, but also part of the establishment of this data and of the legitimacy of moving towards community natural farming and what that means for their fellow farmers. But what it also does is there is, I believe, and I would have to check to make sure, but I believe there is a compensation schedule depending on the work that some of the farmers are doing. So, for example, for the farmers who are traveling to Zambia that are training other farmers in Zambia or training farmers within their community, there's also an accreditation element. Which allows for individuals that may not have had structural or systemic access to education to have their knowledge and expertise recognized in a very formalized system. There's also a lot of work that connects to travel. As I mentioned, sorry to be repetitive in the Zambia case, but also many other countries around the world. But also this leads to better outcomes. So I sat and had a really wonderful conversation with about a dozen of these women, and some of them were moving towards being farmer scientists and were in the training program. And these dense, wonderfully rich notebooks of pests, diseases, soil types, crop yields over time, and just learning how to track these things, understand these things, and put words to something that is such tacit knowledge for many farmers, and being able to share that with other farmers as they're transitioning. So the last one is these feedback networks for new farmers, so allowing you to mentor and support the transition of new farmers onto the program. So I think that there is tangible and intangible things, the tangible things being compensation for time, but also the benefit that you see in your own fields in terms of yields, outputs, and reduction in pest levels. And then the intangibles around this empowerment and this agency piece of being recognized for the work you're doing as an expert, but also being able to mentor and lead in your own community. So I don't know if that helps answer the question, but I will put a link. Actually, I'll do all the links now in the chat that you can read all about the Farmer Academy.
Zhang Zhang is very happy, Joanna, so thank you. Andrew, I have a question that links to the idea of training, but in a different kind of way, from a more from an indigenous communities perspective. I'm wondering if you could speak more. You sort of glossed over really quickly the Guardian tools or the Guardian programs as tools for knowledge transfer, elders speaking to youth. Could you elaborate a little bit on that, please?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so Guardian's just like a formal program that's really, I guess, been supported by the federal government for a few years now. It was a budget item, and there's a whole organization, ILI, Indigenous Leadership Initiative, that do some amazing work in that space. But really, it's recognizing that Indigenous communities are the eyes and the ears of the land. And so it's kind of empowering them to be on the land and monitoring what is happening, right? So in terms of like climate change impacts, that's a thing, but there's some really good examples on the West Coast of monitoring kind of development activities, fisheries, parks and tourism. Like there's lots of I guess it spills over into what is known as like the conservation economy. Um, there's a whole other like body of knowledge that is around this like conservation and conservation economy work that we kind of touch on with our food systems work. So it's a really kind of exciting place to kind of go. But essentially, we use that as a way of using our network, and part of our network is a lot of kind of natural scientists who do work on the land to train community members on kind of what's happening and how to do it, and empower them to be kind of a part of that team, and again really kind of have some more ownership over that. And then, you use it as a tool to engage youth to be out on the land because they don't get those opportunities anymore. And you engage elders to kind of share their knowledge. So you kind of get this wonderful mix of intergenerational knowledge, indigenous knowledge, and science knowledge, all in this very kind of informal setting of camping out in the wilderness. So a lot of wins when you kind of do that, and it's a really good way of building relationships as well, which foster that trust, which fosters kind of more work and kind of better work moving forward.
Thanks, Andrew, for those making those thoughtful connections. I think it underlines what has been said already, that there's lots of common approaches and processes, and those are things that we would want to surface. Erin, when you were giving your presentation, something that was really inspirational to me was the story of, I think it's Benevia, is that right? And how that came on the heels or in the middle of everything that's happening with glyphosate, sorry. You know what I mean? Sorry. Um, and I'm just wondering, do you think that what happened with, oh boy, glyph, I can't say that right now for some reason. Glyphosate.
Glyphosate.
Glyphosate. Thank you. I wrote it down and I'm like, oh, glyphosate. Okay. Did any of that somehow or existing conditions lay the groundwork for what happened with Benevia? Do you think if the glyphosate conversation hadn't been happening, the Benevia would have unfolded exactly as it did, or were there some kind of synergies there in terms of governance and networks and things?
I think there's definitely synergies, and that's why I kind of started off my presentation by setting the stage with what's happened with glyphosate, because I think it did, you know, having that, having the federal government of Mexico start speaking the language of agroecology has really kind of had an impact, I think, across scales. And it's just fascinating to be on the ground in Mexico and hear like the Minister of Agriculture speak with a narrative of agroecology. And I think that
Yeah,
definitely creates space at the state level to then you already have this understanding that people are talking about agrotoxins.
yeah.
Um, yeah. So yes.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, and I think that that's instructive as well, that sort of that dance between different scales and how successes at one scale can be used to leverage successes at other scales. And there's a constant iteration
Well, and I
from,
think yeah, and I think within these governments, whether it's the national or the state or the municipal level, there's a push-pull and there's a lot of tension because you don't have everybody necessarily on board with this narrative. So there can,
yeah,
these governments are contested spaces. But I
yeah,
think as you start to hear some people within government and positions of power use this language, it makes it easier
yeah.
for advocates of agroecology to pick up on that, and you start building a little bit of momentum.
Yeah, absolutely. Sort of narrative shifting. Like if we think back 10 years, this wasn't happening at all. So it is amazing, inspiring change and transformation.
Yeah, and if I
Um,
could just, can I say one quick thing? Because I
yeah,
see a question in the chat about small scale growers and agroecological growers in Canada. And I think, the changing the narrative transcends national borders. And I do a lot of work also with the Ecological Farmers Association of Ontario. And they've just invited me to come and speak at their national conference in December because they've said they actually, for their membership, they find it really amazing to think that there's people in other countries who are interested in what they're doing. And that
yeah,
kind of helps inspire and motivate them. And I hear exactly the same thing when I'm in Mexico, that they find it really amazing that farmers in Canada think what they're doing is
yeah.
interesting and worthwhile and energizing. So I think these transnational conversations are really important. And I think Flow does a really good job of facilitating that.
And the fundamental idea of solidarity, right? I mean, that's what this is all about in the end. Co-creating, sharing knowledge, and learning from each other. Thank you for pointing to the question from Sunshan, who asks. The question for the researchers is, how are these stories of resistance, how can they be more broadly shared to inform and to illuminate practices for small farms and agroecological growers in Canada? So Erin, I think you had your kick at that question, so I'm going to go on to the other speakers, if that's okay. Maybe we'll start with Eve and then Joanna and then end with the Canadian example. You've got like 30 seconds each, and then we need to wrap it up. So I apologize for the thing. And thanks so much for that great question.
I think getting involved in networks like the Flow Network, that's what we can do, is sharing the story, sharing the narratives, and making sure that other people are hearing them, and I think that like as Erin said, when we visited the farmers in Mexico, it's those points of connection, those shared narratives that people see themselves as being reflected in the other's worries, the other's challenges, and the other's solutions, right? So sharing those things in joining networks like this, I think that's how we connect.
I would second that, Eve and Erin. I think that narrative shifting and new narrative norms are essential for breaking through policy structures. I also think that partnerships like Flow allow us to look across case studies and see how there are common challenges and solutions even within contextually specific examples. Something like how farmers are learning to transition without financial supports are questions that I think farmers are grappling with all around the world when they're talking about agroecological transitions. And I would just end with the two pieces in particular for Andra that struck me and that I think connect deeply to the Canadian question, which is so central to so much of my interest of what we can do here while looking to people around the world, which is structural innovation within our governance systems. And also this language and norm shifting. So first, getting the language and getting new normative understandings, but then shifting our structures by using precedent around the world on how we can do this differently. So things like a state-based non-for-profit allows independence and agency from the main Ministry of Agriculture. So there's some flexibility and that there's slow learning happening between those spaces versus having to try to reconstruct that space that's very embedded. Over time, you can create these independent spaces that then can eventually talk to each other. So
thanks, Joanna. Andrew, last word. And before we give you the last word, Andrew, I just want to point people to the chat where there's a link to the Flow Partnership in case anybody's interested in finding out more about the work that we're doing. And we also have another webinar coming up in October. So please join us, register for that. The link is in the chat. Sorry, Andrew, you get the last word.
Super. I was going to say I cannot top what Joanna was saying. But yeah, like what I find is that as community embedded researchers, we don't have the time to kind of get our heads above the weeds, I guess, that we're stuck in. And so we emerge sometimes and we give our 2 cents in a 5 or 10 minute presentation. But I think it's up to the people here to kind of reach out. To me, it's networks of networks, right? Like we use the Flow network and there's other people. It's again, building solidarity across our reach here. Is only going to help. So we're always happy to help. Just remember, I don't always return emails because I'm busy. But we do need to get this word out if we're actually going to make this kind of broad systems change, right?
Absolutely. And that's what this webinar was all about, was helping to make that easier for everybody. So thank you to our amazing panelists for their inspiring stories. I'll have a smile on my face for the rest of the day and more days to come because of all the amazing work you're doing. And thank you so much for the comments and the enthusiasm from our wonderful participants. It was lovely to have so many people on the call and listening. And this webinar will be, it's been recorded, so we will be able to share that out with you in the coming days. And if you're interested in signing up for more webinars, we have more coming in October, November. So thanks for your time and have a really lovely rest of your day. Take good care, everybody. Thanks.